Futures trading involves risk and is not suitable for all investors. Content provided in this segment is meant for educational purposes and is not a solicitation to buy or sell commodities.
Hi, it's Steve and Joe from Fresh Agenda, Everegg's Global Insights team. And Steve, we've had a bit of a week off. You were gallivanting around Southeast Asia last week.
Yes. Picking up some good insights on the Philippines market and the region generally, but yeah, it was quite an interesting little foray. So this week, Joe, some market and trade updates, and we're going to have a look at a pretty interesting GDT result before you'll take us home with a chart of the week.
Let's get into it.
So firstly, back to our favourite chart, the European spot markets. Cream and butter prices have continued to lift, with a bit going on in the background in Europe. So they've kept firming. So we've come back from the Christmas period when there's that uncertainty about, what do we gain some traction, or we are. Cream prices keep rising, butter's going with it. Spot milk is mixed though, with weaker German prices, given the confusion that exists over the foot and mouth cases and what it means for trade, in particular, external trade in German products, which has still got some difficulties. So it's meant spot milk prices in Germany have weakened this week.
Yeah, still a bit to go on that, Steve.
The butter market in Europe is steady, Joe. It's held together, and you can see it's well above where we were before Christmas. But skim milk powder.
Yeah, just drifting a little weaker, Steve. Not huge movements that we've seen over this last few weeks, but yeah, just drifting a little bit weaker. But it's a different story in this part of the world, Steve.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, whole milk powder futures moved up really strongly. This is in the lead up to this week's GDT event. Perhaps some demand pull improving, but we know that also volumes of whole milk powder are being really carefully managed out of New Zealand at the moment. And then in skim milk powder too, we've seen some strength. So particularly in the early contract periods, really moving up quite strongly for skim milk powder futures on the NZX. And then we saw a stronger GDT outcome after all this was settled. So they must have known something, Steve.
Over to the US, and I think the standout here is the cheese market. The spot cheese market has been quite volatile in the last week and a half, or 2 weeks. I've seen it jump around quite a bit, both barrels and blocks. So this idea that, there's more capacity coming on, the market's a bit confused about, what's happening with milk supply, given the disruption in the Southwest and California in particular, and certainly more stories about new cheese volumes coming to market and whether it's replacing existing plant output or, adding to volume. So that's creating uncertainty, and that is washing through the futures market, which has pulled Q2 contracts lower in the past 2 weeks. That's quite interesting to watch, given the outlook we have for US cheese.
Yeah, and also, perhaps a bit of uncertainty around the trade environment, Steve.
I would say. Speaking of trade, Joe, we had EU exports.
Yeah, EU27 trade in volume terms was down 4.3% in November last year. Skim milk powder was flat for the month, but it's down 11% over the last half of 2024 or the last 6 months that we've got data for. And that obviously reflects pretty low supply, Steve.
Yeah.
Cheese is also slowing. Butter monthly trade was slowing too. We saw some big numbers into the US. Just apparently a bit of front loading prior to perhaps a change in the tariff regime in early 2025. Still well up year on year, but all other regions in terms of butter are down, and obviously that reflects the pricing of EU butter relative to other regions. WPC 80 surging, continues to surge up 19% in November and 9% in the last 3 and 6 month period. So still very strong exports for that product, that high pro product. Dry whey is improving. US supplies are tighter, but there is a bit of growth out of China, Steve, for whey products, even though they are quite highly priced at the moment.
Then we had China's import data come out, and this looked really good. Right, trade lifted across the board, more than 40% up, 43% up in milk solids equivalent terms. But look, take the background. There's a lot of things that work into these numbers. We've got pretty low powder stocks in that market, but we do see some improving demand in these numbers. So cheese and butter in particular, you'd say there's, in the background there's an increased pull. And AMF grew for the first time since May 24, but they've been pretty poor, those numbers for AMF in recent months. just bearing in mind that for whole milk and skim milk powder, very slow trade a year ago. We had some shipping delays, so the export numbers from New Zealand, particularly whole milk, were a lot stronger than what was received, and so there was quite a lag there. Plus, we've got an earlier Chinese New Year this year, which has brought a bit of that forward. So, unravelling that, it's best to look at this over a period of time and let's see what the next couple of months deliver. But, a lot of people look at those numbers and go, wow, China's back. No, it's not. GDT 372, a lot of colour in this result. The overall index up 1.4%, which are a pretty strong result for whole milk powder. Again, as you said, Joe, being carefully managed paired to the demand side. And we saw volumes drop 1,500, that announcement last week. And seasonally, we see lower volumes coming out. Skim milk powder was also up. There's also been some pairing of volumes there, more pronounced in February, in the two events in February, we'll see. Butter is up well, but AMF tanked, down 8%. You can see there, that's that background poor demand. Mozzarella in Europe was flat, not shown in this chart, but cheddar was also up 2.5%. So plenty of movement, and demand was good, Joe.
Yeah, as you'd expect for most of these major categories, demand was really strong compared to the average and very weak for AMF, which is why that price wound up where it did, Steve.
Just going through the products, whole milk powder, the strongest again of the products. It's a pretty firm line, managing to stay just under 4,000 through there.
Yeah, and just in context of the last few events that we've had, we saw whole milk powder lift fairly strongly, as you said. It's up $175 a tonne, or 4.6% on last week's pulse, and up, as you said, 5.2% on GDT 371. It's the best whole milk price achieved on GDT since July 2022, Steve. So, a fairly good result in terms of that particular product on this event. And what's driving that? Well, China did turn up, involvement of 40%. Volumes accounted for. And so that's a fairly positive result, because we have seen China's just holding back a little bit in the last two negative results, Steve.
Yeah.
And at the same time, Middle East buyers, as they tend to do, backed off at this rising price and just reduced their involvement for this event.
Skim milk powder also lifted firmer through the curve, and more pronounced on contract 3 there. But when we look at the similar comparison, Joe, with looking at the pulse results, up 2.4% on both the last auction and the pulse, because we had a flat result with the last pulse. And again, best result since early December, so that's also looking more positive. Something I should throw in there is the premium of the New Zealand product versus European lifted to more than $300 a tonne, so that's quite a stunning result for product. European product stayed pretty flat. In terms of where the product went, China's still around 45%, just a small volume drop there in sales with a lower volume offer, but those buyers hung in there.
Yeah, and Southeast Asian skim milk powder buyers, there was a little bit lower involvement and smaller volumes accounted for by those buyers. So as a result, Southeast Asia dropped to less than 30% share of this event's volumes. So, a little bit of stepping back there, Steve.
So where does it leave us with skim milk powder? It's a mixed story, isn't it?
It really is. We're seeing with the stronger NZX futures movements that CME and NZX are pretty much aligned, even though really the CME futures has really been reflecting a lot of internal issues there. Strong carry in the EU. It's well below those other futures benchmarks, and also below these GDT results. But what about butter, Steve?
Butters, we saw a lift across, C1 to C5 would average 2.5%, but the EU market firming in the background. So again, I think this one's been carefully managed in terms of what volumes are offered and how the split between the fat products on GDT, how's that being achieved.
Sure.
EU prices on GDT were steady this week, small declines only, about 0.35% over the C2, C3 for Solaric product. So that's, a bit of a surprise, really, given the firming in that market in the EU in 2 weeks since we've had a GDT.
That's right. So where that all sits, it's completely different from skim milk powder, Steve. So you can see there NZX futures are priced below where we've wound up for GDT and well below where the EEX futures are for butter. But again, NZX and CME much more aligned than the European futures.
And that shows the really well supplied US market, which has got a lot of cream slopping around at the moment.
Certainly does.
This is an interesting chart, Jo. I know you love this sort of comparison.
I think this is really interesting, Steve. So the AMF discount has surged to $780 a tonne this event. So we had that long run through 2024 where AMF prices just continued to increase, but now we're at the second largest discount on GDT ever. So that's really reflecting pretty weak general trade. A lot of that AMF is going into price-sensitive developing markets that are still kind of dealing with the fallout from inflation. And we're seeing really limited US and EU trade to help out the situation as well. So, yeah, really stunning turnaround there for AMF.
And where this leaves this comparison is taken it to rare territory.
Yeah, this is another favourite of mine. Stronger whole milk powder prices mean that this kind of discount for the analogue product has basically switched around. We've had a long period where whole milk powder has been at a really significant discount with those inflated fat prices and skim milk powder not contributing much to that equation. But now with this surge in whole milk powder prices, we've seen that situation absolutely flipped. And we haven't been here since May 2021. So some really interesting trends emerging from this latest GDT, Steve.
All right. And the other interesting result, the steadying in the EU fat market has supported mozzarella. I've seen spot prices do more significant rises than this, but the GDT result is important. It was flat, just above 4,000 euros a tonne, and that is significant. I think that's stabilising that market quite well. So bringing us home, Jo, what have you got for chart of the week?
Well, Steve, now for something completely different. We're back in New Zealand, but we're looking at the milk production numbers that came out for December, up 1.4% in both solids and milk volumes. So that's leaving us with a 3.7% growth rate in the season to date. The pasture indicators are still pretty positive, Steve, overall, although there are some dry spots emerging. But obviously where we are in the season, in volume terms, this is the smallest addition in 5 months. And we're still looking at around 2.5% of an increase for the full season. So pretty good conditions in New Zealand, really good milk price, interest rates moving down, good advance rates, and reasonably good seasonal conditions. It's going to be a good year for Kiwi farmers.
Okay. Well, that's a good wrap. Thanks for watching. We are not going to be providing a video next week. We'll be in San Antonio at the IDFA Dairy Forum. Conditions are difficult to shoot a video and record and get it mixed, all that. So see you in 2 weeks.